Hi, this is Chloe Hall on Retrospectives with John Broughton, celebrating 25 years on KC Radio, 97.7 FM.
You've been playing it safe, laughing along, saying one day maybe you belong.
Just to get us started, was there a lot of music in your house when you were growing up?
There was a lot of music, but not a lot of playing, like actual physical playing. My parents both loved music. And they also spent a lot of time before I was born in Ireland. So they had a lot of musical friends, and any time any of those friends from Ireland were travelling through Australia, they'd bring their sessions with them, and so we'd have a lot of sessioning in the kitchen and in the lounge room. But yeah, that's where it stopped for them. And I'm a bit of an anomaly in our family because I've got some very distant relations who apparently played fiddle, and that's it. There's no other musicians, so I've popped up out of nowhere.
I read where Irish music had a profound influence on you. Were there any particular artists in that genre that really inspired you?
Oh, look, I just love Irish music. I think, often actually the cultures where it's very cold, I think, breed wonderful storytellers and musicians because they just have to huddle indoors and do wonderful things. But I find particularly exciting that crossover, probably in the late 60s, where that influence of rock and, I guess, an electric approach came into traditional folk music. So bands like Planxty, later on the Chieftains, I really love some of those sort of classic, they're kind of like the rock icons of Irish music, but they're certainly mine too. Christy Moore I love as well, Mary Black.
Tell us about your very, very early days playing the open mic type circuit. Were you a confident stage performer right from the beginning?
I don't really think so. I was confident musically, but I used to feel shattered after having to, feeling that I needed to talk. I found it really difficult to kind of understand why people wanted to know more about the songs and more about me. And then the more I actually went to performances as an audience member and realised just how interesting and how much more involved you feel when you get some more background and when you actually understand what's driving this person, what's driving the songs. I started to understand it, and now, I'm a total chatterbox. I love it. So that was a long time ago. That was at the start. But I do remember my very first Port Fairy when I would have been, about 19 or something. And I just played a fairly average show, shall we say. And I remember just sitting with my partner at the time in the middle of an oval, just crying, just saying, why do I have to talk? Why can't I just play the songs? So it wasn't always as easy as it is now.
I believe you could have been lost to music at one stage and set yourself on a career in the corporate world. Is that right?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, I've kind of lost the path a bit for a long time, actually. I was there for almost 7 years.
What were you doing there?
I had a lot of different jobs, actually, but I ended up in middle management in a media company here in Melbourne.
Uh-huh. So was there a defining moment when it dawned on you that this wasn't the life path you wanted to take and you wanted to channel your energies back to music?
Yeah, look, I've spoken about this before, actually, but yes, and the reason it'll be the same is because there was an absolute pivotal point, and that was where I was working back late one night, which I often did, and I was in an open plan office on my own, like under these fluorescent lights, and I was working on these personal investor awards, and I looked down. I'd been there, working really hard, head down all night, and I looked down at the cover, which had been embargoed. It was all this big kind of thing, and the picture on the front of the cover was a man in a suit holding up a golden trophy that was in the shape of a man in a suit with a briefcase. And I just thought, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I just felt utterly replaceable and just thought, I've really got to do something where I'm contributing and where I'm also doing something that is unique, something that only I can do.
Right. Was there any difficulty in making that decision, though, in walking away from what I guess would have been a certain paycheck every week and into the uncertain
world? Oh, look, there
world?
was, actually. I think I hesitated, thinking, look, it could be hormonal. Sit with it for a couple of weeks, but I really did only sit with it for a couple of weeks. I think as soon as it dawned on me, I think a lot of the background work for that thinking had been done, and I knew that it was the right thing. But sure, it was really hard to let go of security, and there's a lot of change around that time as well. But, and that's one of the difficult things about choosing an artistic path, is that it is very difficult to make a living. So you make that choice, whether waking up feeling happy and feeling that you're contributing something worthwhile is worth giving up on that security and that steady income.
Yeah. You've had some success.
And I say yes.
You've had a bit of success writing songs for television. For you as a writer, how does that compare in writing material for your own releases? Do you approach that type of work a little bit differently?
It's completely different, John. Yeah, it's really it's much more the technical nuts and bolts craft of songwriting. Because you get given a brief and it's very specific. You'll need to write a song in a specific style, perhaps for a particular character if you've been given a script. And then you're actually, usually writing to a very tight deadline. And I love it. It kind of really appeals to the very mathematical, nerdy, scientific side of my brain, which is, there's actually quite a big capacity for that in there. Whereas my own stuff, I really only write when I feel something very strongly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen necessarily all the time. And it also can come in waves where I can be very affected by things. And by that, I mean, I can be, when I say feel deeply, that can feel, extremely happy, or something can just crack me up, but it's just something that just breaks through and feels very intense. That's usually when I'll realise that I've picked the guitar up and I'm playing something.
And writing for kids' TV again, which you've done, is that another challenge altogether?
It really is, because especially the kids who are kind of, say, between 10 and 13, that's a really important time in their lives, and they're sort of testing out being teenagers. They're still kids, and it's a really, I feel really responsible for the words that essentially you put in their mouth. Because these kids buy those CDs and they learn the songs and they sing them. So you're literally putting those words in their mouths. And I think they're so impressionable at that age, particularly young girls. And it's really important that the messages in the songs, and I'm not saying all full-on girl power, Spice Girl style, but I do think, it's important that they feel strong, that the lyrics give them strength, that they, feel that the words bring out their best rather than sort of seek validation from outside.
Now, Canada is...
Yeah, I take it probably a bit too seriously, but I do. I kind of think, look, it's, I think it's a really difficult time to be growing up, and if you can do anything, even if it's for 3.5 minutes, to help make a kid's self-esteem grow, that's worth doing.
That's 3.5 minutes well spent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, Canada's a place where you've spent quite some time. What attracted you there initially, and how welcoming a musical community did you find it when you got there?
It's a really interesting place, actually. I think, if I'm honest, it's the cliches. It's the things that brought me there are probably Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen, all the great songwriters that have come out of there. I mean, later, like even, Alanis Morissette, Sarah McLachlan, there's just it's just such a rich culture. And I think, like I was saying before about the cold climates where people get together and tell stories and play music, I think is the case in Canada too. And so I'd always wanted to go to Canada. So touring there last year was just, absolutely a dream come true. And what we found was people who just love their music, and they listen so intensely. I had people coming up at the end of concerts asking me about specific lyrics and saying, now I noticed you changed to the major key rather than the minor key in the third chorus.
Wow.
Why did you do that? And I'd be thinking, did I? They were just really, huge music lovers, big music culture there. So we felt very welcomed. And we also felt like there was a real alliance between Australia and Canada musically. there are quite a few Australian artists who tour regularly over there, which I'd like to become one of.
Yeah.
And there are also quite a number of Canadian artists who tour here too, because I think we're very similar. We're both in huge countries with very few people.
Yep.
And we also, or Canada physically, but us as well, sort of live in the shadow of the US and need to identify ourselves as something separate and with our own unique qualities. And I think we both sort of battle with that culturally. And it means you sort of get a very strong arts and cultural scene in both countries.
Now, there's a real nice storytelling element to your songs. What to you is the key or the secret to good storytelling, apart from obviously a good story?
Well, yeah, that'd be the key.
Yeah.
No, I think it's that depth of feeling. I think to tell a good story, you need to care about the story, and you need to care about the characters in the story, and you need to feel that it's something worth telling, that it's going to be universal enough, that it invites people in and hopefully gives them something to take away. And I think for me, I sit most comfortably in the contemporary folk basket, as opposed to, say, acoustic pop or something, because of that storytelling element. I think the tradition of folk music is all about storytelling. And at the end of the day, a song really for me is just presenting something that is universally true, a very simple idea within a story that allows people access to that thing. So in a way, the story is just an entry point. It's an invitation to experience something and to feel. And it's the very simple thing that's usually in the chorus, but it's definitely at the heart of the song that allows people to feel that. And that's what gives us that uplifting feeling, that where you come away from any great performance feeling that you're full of hope, or that you've made some sort of realization, or you've in some way opened up. And I think that's that kind of really genuine truth at the heart of a song.
Is there a best time for songwriting for you, or a best frame of mind that you need to be in before you can sit down and take on the task?
For my own stuff, it can just come at any time. Often it'll be when I'm on my bike. I don't actually own a car, so I pedal around everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And I really enjoy it, and so often just that feeling of kind of liberation of being your own power, and slipping through the wind, can sort of bring it on. But it really can be any time, and it can be so inconvenient. You can be really in a place where you need to be giving your full concentration, and some lyric will just pop in and you go, and you're really torn, But usually a good song wins for me.
Yeah, well, you have to rely on your memory a bit too, I guess, because you can't write something down when you're on your bike.
Well, I actually don't write anything down.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's that nerdy mathematical part of my brain again. I'm a little bit unusual like that. I do write down my project songs. That's different because it's more, like I was saying, more craft-based.
Mm-hmm.
But my own stuff, I've never written anything down.
Wow.
And I feel like if it's strong enough, I'll remember. And I might have so far.
Go back to your White Sky CD, which I believe was about 2 years in the making. Is that right?
Oh, the very first one?
Yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was a bit of an epic.
Is there a story behind why that became such a long-term project?
Oh, look, yes. I think being the first project, you kind of, I'd put out little sort of acoustic tapes before, back in the day when there were cassette tapes, and White Sky was my first CD, and so I kind of went down this path. I got together with a producer, Drew Stansbury, who was sort of much more indie pop and even electronica, and we were really going down that path, and we pretty much recorded the whole thing when Peter Luscombe, who's the drummer from Paul Kelly's band, he came on and just did the drum track for the title track. And this was, well over a year into recording. So it had taken a long time because we were all inexperienced, But then he came in and put this track down and just changed the feel of the whole thing. And it was suddenly much more electronic and back on the backbeat, and much more kind of in that genre of perhaps like Massive Attack and Portishead and that kind of quite dark electronic feel. And so we decided to redo the whole thing.
Well, is there a danger when a project becomes drawn out like that? Is there a danger that by the time it's completed, you're almost over it and can feel less attached to it than what you may have originally?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think I would never record like that again. Like, I think that sort of protracted experience does remove you from it, and also just sort of kills your enthusiasm for it. You don't necessarily want to tour it because you feel like you've been on the road with it for such a long time already. Whereas now, like, I've recorded a new album which will be coming out next year, and that experience, we pretty much did the bulk of the recording inside 2 weeks. It was a very intense 2 weeks, but it was 2 weeks, and it was just such a pleasure. Like, the whole thing didn't feel like a chore at all. It was a real joy, and everyone involved in it felt like that too. And we would just look at each other at the end of the day and go, "That's what it's meant to be like," But God, I mean, that's 8 years down the track, and a different team of people, and like any career, you sort of find the right people over the years and create your own community.
Yeah. Now, you put a little post-it sticky note on the White Street album that you sent to me, which said that you felt it best represents what your music is about. Looking back on your previous work, do you feel that those were sounds that you had to work through to get to the sound that you brought to the table with White Street?
Yeah, I really do. I have such an affection for those 2 first recordings. I think I needed to try on, other people's clothes in a way. Like, I just sort of, I wanted to explore what those sounds were. I wanted to feel what it was like to be that type of performer. I mean, I'd come up through the folk scene, and I really just went right off on a tangent, and I think I needed to explore more of an electronic sound, and then, and then again, like a more pop sound with the second recording. And in the end, when we demoed White Street, I was working with a cello player at the time who plays on it, Anita Quayle, and we listened to those demos. We were just out sitting in the sun in the garden, and we could hear the demos playing in the studio. And we both said, "Look, there's no getting around it, is there? It's folk music." And it really was. It was just, and it was like a homecoming. It just felt like, it's such a relief, because really that's what I do, and that's what I love, and I've always loved that. Like, even at festivals as a audience member, the music that stops me in my tracks and makes me go into a venue is the real sound of an acoustic guitar or any acoustic instrument, whether it's, the harp or, a double bass, just something that's really genuinely coming off the stage as it's played. That's the thing that I love. Warmth and clarity in real instruments and voices.
That real earthy feel comes through on the last record. It's not overloaded with too much instrumentation or overproduced in any way. So that's definitely your preference as a listener to music as well.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. I think I like listening to things that could be played completely unplugged.
Mm-hmm.
So instruments that actually have their own inbuilt amplification. Like any instruments where you could just cut the power and we could still just sit around a fire and play that music. And that's the music I love to play and the music I love to listen to too.
Tell us about James, who accompanies you on cello these days. How did you first meet up? Were you looking specifically for a cello as an accompanying instrument?
I was, yes. I'd played with 2 cello players in the past, Mel Pinkerton, who was from the Anyones, and Anita Quayle, who then went to start up her own record company. And then, so when Anita and her partner decided to do that, I was cello playerless, and I put out feelers for a new cello player, and I actually auditioned quite a lot of people with classical background, who were beautiful players, gorgeous technique, gorgeous sound. And then a friend of mine, who's also a singer-songwriter, had known James through his work with the Ang Fang Quartet, and they play improv, beautiful kind of string-based improv to silent films. And so I met up with James, and James, wasn't as technically strong, but his attitude was fantastic. He'd come from more of almost like a punk busker background, and he was so energetic and just so much rawer, and I don't know, I loved it. I just kind of really, it was just a really different way to approach the cello. And as it turns out, he's actually the lead singer of Man Bites God, who are like a irreverent rock band with quite a big underground following. But they're very rude and very funny, and so that sort of energy he kind of brought to the cello, where he doesn't treat it with too much reverence. It's kind of lots of punchy rhythms and really kind of confident playing, and I just loved it. It was great. So we played together for 3.5 years.
So going right back, was there any initial inspiration that saw you go to the cello as an accompanying instrument? Because it's not one you commonly see in contemporary circles.
No, I think way back when I was a kid, having piano lessons, I had a beautiful piano teacher called Julie, who would take me to concerts. And one of the concerts I remember, and I was probably, I don't know, about 12 or 13 at the time, was this beautiful cellist playing solo, and it was just stunning. And it was the first time that I'd really heard the possibility of the cello and the tone. And I just fell in love with it. And then when I was, later down the track, I'd sort of done a bit of solo performing, and I thought I'd love to play with someone else. And I thought, I wonder if it'd work with cello. And completely, by surprise, I met up with Mel Pinkerton, who was the first cellist I worked with. And I mean, I just knew as soon as we had our first rehearsal, like even just warming up, I felt like, oh God, I could just lie on the floor and listen to those big bottom notes, for hours. It's just such a rich, warm sound. It's so emotional. And I've just always really loved it.
Now, you've been working with Greg Arnold as your producer. How advantageous was it to have, as a producer, someone who is also a musician and singer-songwriter themselves?
It's been a huge part of it, John. And it's interesting because Greg and I have now worked on 3 recordings together. He came on board for the pop recording as well. And I think, I look to him now more as a mentor than just a producer. Just a producer, I shouldn't say that. I mean, it's such a huge role anyway. But the first 2 recordings, he was sort of more of a co-producer.
Yeah.
And then with this new recording, I literally just handed it over to him. We thrashed out our differences and we agreed on a vision for the whole project. And then I took a step back and became a player on my own record and let him take care of the vision. And there's a huge amount of trust involved with something like that. But he is such a tasteful musician and such a brilliant songwriter himself that I have absolute faith in him. And I hope we keep working together for many years, because he's a very easy person to work with. He's a really generous person to work with, and I love what he's done with me so far.
Now, you've got your own label happening to get your music out there. What have been the pros and cons of doing it all independently?
All in all, I think I'm really glad that I've done it. It's a lot of work. It's probably the cons. It's as far as distribution is probably the biggest thing. I'm distributed through Shock, but they're more used to distributing indie and rock acts and kids acts. So for them, contemporary folk is a different genre, and we really had to kind of iron out a few issues at the start. I'm glad that I've done it in terms of creative control and artistic direction, because I really love the sound of the music. But we'll see with this next record. Like I'm exploring a couple of different options, and I'll see where it can go in the future.
Right. Tell us more about this new record. It is completed now. The recording is all done.
It is, and I was quite fortunate actually. I mixed it in Nashville on the way back from our Canadian tour, and I mixed it with Brad Jones, who I'd heard and loved through Greg, and it's just it's like another step down the path that White Street put me on. So it's kind of it's still very much acoustic, but the songs are probably a little bit more uplifting. Overall they're kind of they're not in a way, because there's a lot of depth to them too. A lot of that album, the new album, was written just after my mum passed away. So there's a type of sadness and darkness even in the most hopeful of songs. And I think that kind of I'm trying to search for the word here, but there's kind of like a mixture of really elevating feelings and depth as well, which I'm really happy with. And there's a lot of playfulness on the album as well, so it's quite driving and, to me, adventurous. I just love it. I can't wait for it to get out there. but that's part of having your own record labels. You've got to put all the foundations in place, and that's much more time consuming than if you had a big record company looking after it all.
Right. So you're looking at early 2009 now for that, are you?
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic. And just before I let you go, Chloe, what else is in your books for the rest of this year?
This year, really, I'll be doing a few performances here and there. Like, I'm playing at the Peace concert organised by Japanese for Peace on Nagasaki Day, which is in early August on the 9th. That's a big concert at the Melbourne Town Hall.
Okay.
And I'll be doing a few sort of special appearances like that. But really, I've just got to put my head down and make sure everything's in place for the launch of the new album next year.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to that.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time, Chloe. It's been great catching up with you.
Thanks. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it, John. Thanks.
Congratulations on wonderful music to date, and I'm sure many, many more years of it to come.
Thank you.
And I'll actually make a diary note there to catch up with you again in the new year, talk about the new one when it comes out.
That'd be lovely.